Sarah and her daughter were evicted and walk aimlessly with only 2 backpacks. At the square, not knowing where to sleep, they are surprised by a stranger who returns the girl's drawing notebook. This unexpected encounter triggers a twist that will forever change the destiny of both. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear in your life. Sarah and her daughter Beatrice were living in a desperate economic situation on the west side of Chicago, in a working-class neighborhood where the narrow streets bore witness to stories of struggle and resilience. For months, they had faced a lack of stable work and the growing accumulation of debts that seemed to snowball, impossible to stop. Sarah had lost her job as a cashier at a chain supermarket where she had worked for almost 7 years, a place where she knew every aisle, every product, every regular customer who passed through her line with a smile and a friendly word. The layoff came as a surprise on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the manager called her into the small back office and explained that the company was restructuring, that they needed to cut costs, that it was nothing personal. But how could it not be personal when her entire life depended on that salary? After the layoff, Sarah started working as a day cleaner in various houses, picking up jobs here and there, cleaning bathrooms, waxing floors, organizing closets for people who didn't even look her in the eye when she arrived in the morning. The money wasn't enough to cover the rent on the small apartment where they lived, a simple 2-bedroom place on the 3rd floor of a building without an elevator, but which had been their home for over 5 years. There, Beatrice had taken her first steps. There they had celebrated modest but love-filled birthdays. There Sarah had cried alone so many nights after Beatrice's father abandoned them when the girl was only 2. The landlord, Mr. Warren, a man in his 60s with greying hair and a perpetually tired expression, had been patient for 3 months with the late payments. He knew about Sarah's situation, had known the girl since she was little, and so he would give her a few more days, then another week, then accept half the amount with the promise that she would catch up the following month. But the months piled up, and the debt grew. And on a Saturday morning, as Sarah was returning from a cleaning job that had started at 6 a.m., she found a note under the door. It was a formal notice, handwritten in old Mr. Warren's shaky script, saying that he could wait no longer, that he had bills to pay too, that he needed the apartment back by the end of that week. Sarah felt her world collapse. She read the note 3 times, then 4, as if the words would change their meaning if she insisted long enough. But they didn't. She had 5 days to get out, 5 days to find another place, to gather money she didn't have, to explain to her 8-year-old daughter that they would have to leave the only home Beatrice had ever known. That night, Sarah barely slept. She lay in the narrow bed in her room, staring at the cracked ceiling where a damp patch had formed, a patch she always promised to paint but never had the money to buy the paint for. She thought about calling acquaintances, old colleagues from the supermarket, the homeowners where she cleaned, but she knew no one could really help. Everyone was struggling, everyone had their own problems. Her mother, Constance, had passed away the year before. Sarah still missed her every day, that strong, comforting presence that always had a word of comfort, a hug that made everything seem less difficult. Constance had been the pillar of the family, a woman who raised Sarah alone after. Her father left, a woman who worked as a cook in restaurants for decades to provide an education and food for her daughter. When she was gone, it was as if a part of Sarah had gone with her. There was no one else, no close family, no siblings, no cousins or uncles who could lend a hand. Beatrice's father had disappeared years ago, probably in another state. Maybe he had another family. Maybe he didn't even remember he had a daughter named Beatrice with brown eyes and a smile that could light up any room. The 5 days passed, far too quickly. Sarah tried to negotiate for another week, a few more days, anything. She knocked on Mr. Warren's door with Beatrice by her side, holding her daughter's hand tightly, trying to keep her composure as she begged for more time. Old Mr. Warren looked at them with genuine sadness in his eyes, but he shook his head slowly. He explained that he had already rented the apartment to another family, that he had signed a lease, that he couldn't go back on it. Sarah understood. There was no anger, only a heavy resignation that settled in her chest. like a stone. On Friday morning, the day of the eviction, Sarah woke up early and started to pack the little they had. She set aside 2 old backpacks, one for her and one for Beatrice, and put in the essentials: a few changes of clothes, documents, their toothbrushes, the teddy bear Beatrice had gotten from her grandmother before she passed. Everything else would have to stay: the furniture, the pots and pans, the few books she had, the framed photos on the wall. Mr. Warren said he would store everything for a while in case she managed to get back on her feet. But Sarah knew she would probably never see those things again. Beatrice watched everything in silence, sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching the teddy bear to her chest. She was a smart girl, too perceptive for her age, and even without fully understanding what was happening, she knew something very bad was unfolding. Sarah tried to smile at her, to make jokes about going on an adventure, but her voice came out shaky and false, and Beatrice was no fool. When they finally left the apartment for the last time, Sarah locked the door, with the key, which she handed to Mr. Warren, who was waiting in the hallway. The old man said nothing, just took the key and gave her an awkward pat on the shoulder, a gesture that tried to convey solidarity, but only added to the weight of the moment. Sarah picked up the 2 backpacks, took Beatrice's hand, and they walked down the stairs for the last time. Each step felt heavier than the last. On the ground floor, they crossed the small lobby where Beatrice used to play with the other children from the building, passed through the rusty, iron gate that always creaked when opened, and stepped out onto the street. It was an overcast June afternoon, with that damp, chill characteristic of a Chicago winter. Sarah paused on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back at the building that had been her home, and felt tears burn in her eyes. But she couldn't cry, not in front of Beatrice. She had to be strong. She had to find a solution. They started walking with no particular direction, just getting away from there, because standing still hurt too much. Beatrice tugged on her mother's coat sleeve and asked, with that thin, innocent voice that broke Sarah's heart, "Mum, where are we going?" Sarah swallowed the lump that had formed in her throat and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're just going for a walk, honey. How about we go to that little park you like? We can sit there, rest for a bit." Beatrice accepted the answer without question, and they continued walking through the neighborhood streets. The park was about a 20-minute walk away, a small green space surrounded by low fences, with a few concrete benches, a rusty seesaw, and a slide that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was one of the few places where Beatrice could play, where Sarah sometimes took her daughter on Sundays to get some sun and forget for a few hours about the worries that consumed her. When they arrived, the park was almost empty. Just an elderly man walking a mutt and 2 teenage girls sitting on a bench, talking quietly. Sarah and Beatrice sat on a more secluded bench, under a tree, whose branches swayed gently in the cold breeze. Sarah opened her backpack and took out an apple, the only food they had managed to get that day. She broke the apple in half with her hands and gave the larger half to Beatrice, who began to eat slowly, taking small bites and chewing carefully, as if she wanted to make that apple last as long as possible. Sarah watched her daughter eat and felt a mixture of intense love and crushing guilt. How had it come to this? How had she let her life fall apart so much? She had always tried to do everything right, always worked hard, always strived to give Beatrice the best, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The world seemed to conspire against people like her, people born without privilege, without a support network, without a financial cushion to soften life's inevitable falls. The afternoon wore on, and the cold grew more intense. The 2 teenage girls left, as did the old man with the dog. The park became deserted, and the lampposts began to turn on automatically, casting a weak, yellowish light over the space. Beatrice finished her half of the apple and put the core in her coat pocket, saying she would plant it one day to grow an apple tree. Sarah smiled at that, one of those small joys that children bring even in the darkest moments, but reality could not be ignored for long. Beatrice looked at her mother with those big eyes and asked again, this time with a more trembling, more frightened voice, "Mum, where are we going to sleep tonight?" The question pierced Sarah like a knife. She had no answer. She simply didn't. She could lie, make up some story. But Beatrice deserved better than that. She deserved honesty as much as possible. Sarah pulled her daughter close, hugging her tightly, feeling the small, warm body against hers. "We'll figure something out, my love. Mommy always figures something out, doesn't she? We're going to be okay." But even as she said it, Sarah didn't believe her own words. How would they be okay? Where would they sleep? How would they eat tomorrow? The questions swirled in her head endlessly, each one more agonizing than the last. It was in this moment of silent desperation, as she held Beatrice on the cold park bench, that Sarah heard footsteps approaching. She lifted her head and saw a man walking toward them. He was a man in his early 40s with dark hair showing a few silver strands at the temples, wearing jeans and a simple jacket. He was holding something in his hands and was coming directly toward the bench where they were sitting. Sarah's protective instincts immediately kicked in. She narrowed her eyes, tensed up, and held Beatrice even tighter. You couldn't trust strangers, especially in a big city like Chicago, especially when you were vulnerable, with nothing, with no one. Who was this man? What did he want? Sarah was ready to get up and run if necessary. But then the man stopped a few feet away and raised his hand in a peaceful gesture showing what he was holding. It was a sketchbook. Beatrice's sketchbook. Sarah recognized it immediately, the pink cover with flower drawings that Beatrice loved, the sketchbook the girl had received at school at the beginning of the year and carried everywhere, drawing whenever she had a pencil and a free moment. Beatrice let out a little cry of joy and jumped up from the bench. "My sketchbook! Mommy, it's my sketchbook!" The man smiled gently and came closer, holding out the sketchbook to the girl. "You dropped this near the gate of your building. I saw you pass by and tried to call out, but you were already too far. I followed you here to give it back." Sarah felt a momentary relief mixed with gratitude, but she was still on guard. "Thank you," she said curtly, taking the sketchbook from the man's hands and giving it to Beatrice. "It was very kind of you to come all this way just for this." The man shrugged. "It was nothing. I know how important these things are to kids." He was about to turn and leave, but then he paused and looked again at Sarah and Beatrice. There was something in his eyes, an understanding that went beyond words. He saw the two old backpacks on the ground next to the bench, saw their simple, worn clothes, saw the exhaustion on Sarah's face, saw the way Beatrice huddled against her mother, and something in him understood, simply understood. "Excuse me if I'm overstepping," he said carefully, choosing his words, "but are you two okay? Do you need any help?" Sarah's automatic response was to deny it. Pride, fear, distrust, all mixed into an immediate refusal. "We're fine, thank you. We don't need anything." The man nodded respectfully but didn't move. He stood there for a few more seconds as if weighing something in his mind. "Look," he said finally, "I don't know what your situation is, and I'm not going to ask because it's none of my business. But it's getting cold, it's going to be a rough night out here, and if you need a place to stay to have something hot to eat, my house isn't far from here. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm not some dangerous weirdo, just someone who's been through hard times and knows how important it is when someone offers a hand." Sarah stared at him wide-eyed. A part of her wanted to scream no, that they didn't know this man, that this could be dangerous, that you can't trust strangers. But another part of her, the desperate part, the part that was terrified at the thought of spending the whole night on that cold park bench with her 8-year-old daughter, considered the offer. She looked at Beatrice, who was looking at the man with childish curiosity, then looked back at him, trying to read something in his face, trying to detect any sign of danger. But what she saw was sincerity. She saw a genuine kindness in those dark eyes, a deep understanding from someone who truly knew what it was to suffer. And in that moment, Sarah realized she had no real choice. It wasn't pride. It wasn't distrust that mattered now. It was survival. It was her daughter's well-being. And if there was even the remotest chance that this man was being honest in his offer, she had to accept. Because the alternative was to spend the night exposed to the cold, to hunger, to the dangers of the streets. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, her voice still cautious but less harsh. The man smiled slightly. "My name is Daniel. Daniel Fisher. I've lived in this neighborhood for about 15 years. And you? Sarah hesitated for a second before answering. Sarah, and this is my daughter, Beatrice. She took a deep breath, making a decision that could change everything. If the offer still stands, we accept. Just for tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure something out. Daniel nodded with understanding, without making a fuss, without showing pity or superiority. He just accepted her decision with respect. Of course. Let's go then. It's not far. A 10-minute walk. He turned and started walking, and Sarah picked up the 2 backpacks, took Beatrice's hand, and followed behind him, her heart pounding in her chest, not knowing if she was making the best decision of her life or the biggest mistake possible. As they walked through the dimly lit neighborhood streets, Sarah watched Daniel closely, ready to grab Beatrice and run at the first sign of trouble. But Daniel walked calmly, making small comments about the neighborhood, about how the winter was colder this year, about trivial things that helped ease the tension in the air. Beatrice, for her part, seemed more relaxed, holding her recovered sketchbook tightly and looking around with the natural curiosity of a child. After exactly 10 minutes, as Daniel had promised, they arrived at a simple house on a quiet residential street. It was a small single-story house with a small fence out front and a modest but well-tended garden. Daniel opened the gate and gestured for them to enter. Sarah swallowed hard and walked through the gate, feeling as if she were crossing some kind of invisible threshold, entering an unknown territory where she didn't know what she would find. Daniel opened the front door and turned on the lights. The inside of the house was simple but welcoming. A small living room with a worn but clean sofa, a bookshelf with some books and picture frames, a wooden dining table with 4 chairs. Everything was very basic but neat and cared for. There was a pleasant smell in the air, something Sarah couldn't immediately identify. "Come on in, make yourselves at home," Daniel said, closing the door behind them. "You must be hungry. Let me fix something for us to eat." Sarah was about to protest, to say they didn't want to be a bother, but her stomach rumbled before she could speak, betraying the hunger she had tried to ignore all day. Daniel smiled gently. "No formalities. Sit down. Food will be ready in 15 minutes. He disappeared into the kitchen, and Sarah and Beatrice stood in the living room, still a bit displaced, not knowing exactly what to do. Beatrice tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "He seems nice, doesn't he, Mom?" Sarah looked down at those brown eyes full of hope and felt her heart clench. "Yes, honey, he does." They sat on the sofa, and Sarah hugged Beatrice again, kissing the top of her daughter's head, silently thanking whatever force had brought this small miracle in the form of a kind stranger in a cold Chicago park. While they waited, Sarah looked around, observing the details of the house. In the picture frames on the bookshelf, she saw photos of Daniel with an older woman, probably his mother. There were photos of him younger, smiling on a beach, at a party. It looked like a normal, ordinary life of someone who worked and lived his routine. Nothing there suggested danger, nothing. They set off Sarah's internal alarms. She began to relax a little, allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found an angel in a moment of absolute need. Daniel returned from the kitchen, carrying a tray with steaming plates. The smell of home-cooked food filled the living room and made Sarah's stomach rumble again, this time louder. It was spaghetti with a simple tomato sauce, but prepared with care, accompanied by a few slices of toasted bread and a little grated cheese on top. To someone who hadn't eaten properly in days, it looked like a feast, fit for royalty. He placed the tray on the coffee table and made an inviting gesture. "Let's eat while it's hot. It's nothing fancy, but it fills the stomach and warms the heart." Sarah and Beatrice approached the table with a certain shyness, still processing the kindness of this stranger who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. They sat on the wooden chairs as Daniel served the plates, giving generous portions to each of them. Beatrice looked at her mother for silent permission before starting to eat. Sarah nodded, and the girl picked up her fork with both hands, carefully, twirling the spaghetti before bringing it to her mouth. When the first forkful touched her tongue, her eyes widened with pleasure. "This is delicious, Uncle Daniel," she exclaimed, with that childlike sincerity that knows no filters or social protocols. Daniel smiled broadly, clearly pleased with the compliment. "I'm glad you like it, Beatrice. My mom taught me to cook when I was little. She always said that a man who knows how to cook never goes hungry." He looked at Sarah, who was eating more slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the last meal of her life. "And you, Sarah? Is it good?" Sarah swallowed what she was chewing and nodded, feeling tears burn in her eyes. It wasn't just the food, although it was truly delicious. It was everything: the unexpected kindness, the non-judgmental welcome, the feeling of being safe, even if temporarily in a warm and protected place after a day that had been one of the worst of her life. "It's wonderful," she managed to say, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to us." Daniel shook his head, downplaying her gratitude. "No, need to thank me. I know exactly how much it means." There was something in the way he said it, a depth, an understanding that went beyond superficial empathy. Sarah noticed, but she didn't ask. Not yet. First, she needed to finish eating, to calm the stomach that ached with hunger, to let Beatrice feel safe and cared for. They ate in relative silence, with just a few scattered comments about the food, about the cold outside, about small things that filled the air without demanding much. When they finished, Daniel collected the plates and took everything to the kitchen, refusing Sarah's offer to help. "You're my guest tonight. Let me take care of this." While he washed the dishes in the kitchen, Sarah looked around again. The house was modest, but revealed the care of someone who valued their space, even if it was simple. The walls were painted a neutral shade of beige. There were a few plants in the living room window, and the bookshelf held an interesting mix of books. American novels, some self-help books, technical manuals on mechanics. Daniel was a man who read, who was interested in different subjects, who took care of his home, even living alone. Beatrice was getting sleepy, resting her head on her mother's shoulder, struggling to keep her eyes open. It had been a long and emotionally exhausting day for an 8-year-old. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, feeling the small, warm weight against her body. And for the first time since they left the apartment, she allowed herself to breathe with a little less tightness in her chest. Daniel returned from the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel. He looked at Beatrice dozing off and smiled tenderly. "The little one is tired. Let me show you the room where you can sleep." Sarah was about to protest, to say they could sleep on the sofa, that they didn't want to impose more than they already had, but Daniel gently raised his hand. "It's no trouble at all. I have a guest room that's always empty. It's simple, but it has a comfortable bed and clean blankets. You'll be better off there than on the sofa." He led them down a small hallway to the bedrooms. He passed the door of what was presumably his room and opened the one next to it. It was indeed a simple room, with a double bed covered with a navy blue comforter, a small closet, a window with white curtains and a lamp on a nightstand. But it was clean. It smelled nice, and the bed looked incredibly inviting after a full day of walking the streets. "The bathroom is right across the hall," Daniel pointed out. "There are clean towels in the closet. If you need anything during the night, my room is right here. You can call me. No problem." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "I know you don't know me, and this must all seem strange. But I promise you, you are safe here. I won't do anything. I don't expect anything in return. I just want to help." Sarah looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of falsehood, any hint of ulterior motives. But all she saw was sincerity, a disarming sincerity that made her last defensive walls begin to crumble. "I believe you," she said softly, "and I don't know how to thank you for all this. We'll leave early tomorrow and won't bother you any more." Daniel shook his head. "Tomorrow is another day. We'll see how things are tomorrow. For now, get some rest. Good night, Sarah. Good night, Beatrice." He waved to the girl who was nearly asleep on her feet, and she gave a shy wave back before snuggling into her mother's arms again. Daniel left the room, closing the door slowly behind him, leaving mother and daughter alone. Sarah helped Beatrice change, dressing her in the worn pajamas she had brought in her backpack. The girl could barely keep her eyes open, murmuring disconnected phrases about her sketchbook, the delicious spaghetti, the nice uncle who had appeared. Sarah put her in bed and covered her with the blue comforter, which was surprisingly soft and warm. Beatrice curled up under the covers, clutching her teddy bear to her chest, and in less than 2 minutes, she was fast asleep. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, just watching her daughter sleep. On Beatrice's face there were no signs of worry now, only the quiet peace of a child who was finally somewhere safe and comfortable. The tears Sarah had held back all day finally began to stream down her face. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of emotional exhaustion. She cried silently, letting it all out, all the accumulated tension and fear. After a few minutes, she wiped her face with her hands, went to the bathroom Daniel had indicated, and washed her face. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a 32-year-old woman who looked 40, with deep dark circles under her eyes, tired skin, disheveled hair. She saw a woman who had been broken by life, but who had not yet completely surrendered. She saw a mother who would do anything for her daughter, who would survive anything as long as it meant Beatrice would be okay. She returned to the room and lay down beside her daughter on the comfortable bed. For the first time in months, maybe years, she was able to relax a little. Not completely, because there were still 1,000 worries in her head, 1,000 questions about the future, but enough for her tense muscles to loosen a bit, for her breathing to become more regular. She closed her eyes, and surprisingly, she slept. The next morning, Sarah woke to the smell of fresh coffee. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was, and panic washed over her. But then she saw Beatrice, sleeping beside her, saw the unfamiliar but welcoming room, and it all came back. The eviction, the park, Daniel. She sat up in bed carefully so as not to wake her daughter, and checked her phone. It was 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. They had slept for almost 10 hours straight. She got up slowly, ran her hands through her hair, and left the room. In the hallway, she followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen, where she found Daniel making breakfast. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair still a bit messy from sleep, but with a calm and relaxed expression. "Good morning," he greeted her as she entered. "Sleep well?" Sarah nodded, still a bit shy in this strange situation of being in the house of a stranger who somehow no longer felt so strange. "I slept better than I expected. Thank you for letting us stay. The bed is very comfortable." Daniel smiled. "Good. I was making breakfast. Nothing fancy, but there's fresh bread, coffee, milk, butter, and jam. Is Beatrice awake yet?" At that moment, as if the universe were waiting for the perfect cue, Beatrice appeared at the kitchen door, rubbing her eyes, her teddy bear dangling from one hand. "Good morning," she said, her voice still hoarse with sleep. The three of them had breakfast together at the kitchen table. It was a strangely domestic and normal scene, as if it were routine, as if they had known each other for years and not just a few hours. Beatrice was more cheerful in the morning, telling Daniel about her drawings, her friends at school, the teacher she adored. Daniel listened with genuine attention, asking questions, laughing at the funny stories, showing real interest in the life of this little girl he barely knew. Sarah watched the interaction with a heavy heart. Beatrice had never had a present father figure. Her father had left when she was very young, and since then it had been just Sarah and her against the world. Seeing her daughter interact with Daniel so naturally and trustingly was both comforting and painful. Comforting because it showed that Beatrice was still capable of trust, of opening up, of forming bonds. Painful because Sarah wondered if she was depriving her daughter of something important by not having a man in their lives. After breakfast, while Beatrice watched cartoons in the living room, Sarah helped Daniel with the dishes. They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Daniel broke it. "Sarah, I don't want to pry, but do you have a plan? Somewhere to go?" The question, though asked gently, brought back all the reality that Sarah had managed to temporarily forget. She stopped washing the plate she was holding and stared at the soapy water in the sink. "No," she admitted in a low voice. "I have no plan at all. I have no family, no friends who can take us in. I was thinking of going to a city shelter, but I'm scared. I've heard bad stories about those places." Daniel nodded understandingly. "I get it. And work? Were you looking?" Sarah dried her hands and leaned against the kitchen counter. I work as a day cleaner, but it's not enough. The jobs are sporadic. I can't save money for rent. I lost my steady job months ago, and since then it's been a constant struggle just to get food on the table. There was shame in her voice as she admitted it, a shame that Daniel noticed immediately. There's nothing shameful about going through hard times, he said firmly. It happens to more people than you think. The system is designed for us to fail, especially people like us who start from the bottom. He paused, as if making an important decision. Look, I have a proposal for you. It might sound strange coming from someone you met yesterday, but hear me out. Sarah turned to face him, curious and a little apprehensive. Daniel continued, I work as a mechanic at a shop nearby. I don't make a lot, but it's enough to live comfortably on my own. This house is mine, paid off, inherited from my mother. The room where you slept is always empty. I was thinking, what if you two stayed here for a while, just until you can save enough money to rent a new place, find a better job, get organized? Sarah stared at him, dumbfounded. Daniel, I can't accept that. You don't even know us. Why would you do something like that? He shrugged, but there was something deeper in his gaze. Because I've been where you are now, not in the exact same situation but close, and I know how different it would have been if someone had offered me a hand when I needed it most. There was a story there, Sarah realized, a story Daniel hadn't told yet, but that weighed on him somehow. She wanted to ask, wanted to know more, but at the same time she respected that he would share when and if he wanted to. I don't know what to say, she murmured. This is too generous. How could I ever repay you? Daniel thought for a moment. If you want to repay me somehow, you can take care of the house while I'm at work. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. I'm terrible at keeping the house organized when I'm alone, and you said you work as a cleaner, so it would be something you already know how to do. It's not a formal job with a salary, but at least you'd have a roof over your heads, food and safety, while you look for something better. The offer was too tempting, too good to be true. All her life, Sarah had learned that when something seems too good to be true, there's usually a catch. But looking at Daniel, at this man who had appeared out of nowhere with his quiet kindness and honest eyes, she couldn't see any catch. She saw only a genuinely good person trying to help another person in need. Okay, she said finally, her voice firm despite the internal tremor. We accept, but with conditions. First, this is temporary. As soon as I can get on my feet, we'll leave and won't bother you anymore. Second, I'll take care of the house, cook, clean, do everything you need. But if at any point you want us to leave, you just have to say so. And third, any strange behavior, anything that makes me feel uncomfortable or threatens my daughter in any way, we leave immediately. Deal? Daniel extended his hand to seal the agreement. Deal. And Sarah, about that last point, I would never, ever do anything to put you in danger. You have my word. She shook his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip, the calmness in his skin, and something inside her relaxed a little more. The following days unfolded in a surprisingly pleasant routine. Sarah would wake up early, make breakfast for the three of them, organize the house while Daniel went to work at the shop, pick up Beatrice from school in the afternoon, and prepare dinner for when he returned. Beatrice adapted quickly, treating Daniel with a mixture of respect and affection that grew with each passing day. The man, in turn, was patient and attentive with the girl, sometimes bringing small gifts from the shop, a colorful keychain, a cool sticker, chocolates he had bought on his way home. Sarah, initially cautious and always maintaining a certain emotional distance, began to realize that Daniel was exactly what he appeared to be, a good, hard-working, lonely man who found joy in helping two people who truly needed it. They would talk at night after Beatrice went to bed, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, their disappointments. Daniel told her about his work at the shop, how he had learned the trade from a neighbor as a teenager, how his mother had raised him alone after his father left. Sarah shared her own story, a poor but love-filled childhood thanks to her mother, the disastrous relationship with Beatrice's father, the years of struggle trying to balance motherhood and work, the devastating loss of Constance the previous year. There was an ease between them that was rare, a mutual understanding of people who knew the bitter taste of adversity and had survived thanks to their own strength and resilience. One Tuesday night, about 2 weeks after Sarah and Beatrice had moved into Daniel's house, the three of them were having dinner when the man made an announcement. "I have some news," he said, sounding a little nervous. Sarah and Beatrice looked at him expectantly. "A friend of mine owns a small commercial cleaning company. He was looking for someone to work part-time cleaning offices at night. I told him about you, Sarah, and he said if you want it, you can start next week. The pay isn't great, but it's steady with benefits, and the hours would allow you to pick Beatrice up from school before you go to work." Sarah dropped her fork onto her plate, her eyes wide with surprise. "Really? You did that for me?" Daniel smiled modestly. "I just mentioned I knew someone who needed work and was very competent. The rest was his decision. But yes, if you want it, the job is yours." Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes. It was a real job on the books, a fixed salary, with the possibility of planning a future. It was the first real step out of the hole she had fallen into. "Yes, I want it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much, Daniel. I don't know how I'll ever be able to thank you for everything you're doing for us." Daniel shook his head, clearly uncomfortable with the excessive gratitude. "No need to thank me. I'm doing what any decent person would do." But Sarah knew that wasn't true. Most people would have walked past them in the park without a second glance. Most people wouldn't have cared about a homeless mother and daughter. Daniel was special, and with each passing day, Sarah realized this more and more clearly. Months went by, and Sarah's life began to take a shape she hadn't thought possible just months before. The job at the commercial cleaning company turned out to be much better than she had expected. Her boss, Michael, was a fair man who valued dedicated employees, and Sarah quickly proved to be one of his best. She worked diligently, always arrived on time, never complained about any task, and soon earned his trust. After 3 months, Michael increased her hours and consequently her salary, recognizing the value of this woman who did her job with pride and competence. Beatrice was doing well in school. Her grades had improved considerably, and her teacher commented to Sarah that the girl seemed happier, more focused, more present. It was no surprise. For the first time in a long time, Beatrice had stability, a real home, food on the table every day, and didn't have to worry about whether she would have a place to sleep at night. The transformation in the child was visible. She smiled more, played more, and had started drawing again with the same passion as before. The relationship between Sarah and Daniel had also evolved in a natural and unexpected way. What began as gratitude on her part and generosity on his had transformed into something deeper, true friendship. They talked about everything, shared stories of their day, laughed together at little things, supported each other in difficult times. Daniel had become a constant presence in Beatrice's life as well, a kind of father figure the girl had never had. He helped her with her homework, played with her on weekends, and showed up for her school performances. And he did all this naturally, without fanfare, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Sarah began to save money. With every paycheck she received, she set a portion aside in a savings account she had opened. It was a long-term plan, to save enough for a down payment on a small apartment, to finally have something that was just hers and Beatrice's, to not depend on anyone's kindness, no matter how genuine. She had talked to Daniel about it, and he fully supported the idea, although he made it clear that they could stay at his house for as long as they needed. But there was something Sarah noticed in Daniel, something he tried to hide, but that sometimes appeared in his eyes. A deep sadness, a longing he carried with him. She noticed it especially when he looked at the photos of his mother on the bookshelf, or when he mentioned a memory from his childhood. There was a story there that he hadn't fully shared yet, and Sarah respected that, waiting for the moment when he felt comfortable enough to open that chapter of his life. That moment came one Sunday night, when Beatrice had already gone to sleep, and the two of them were sitting on the living room sofa, each with a cup of tea in their hands, talking about nothing in particular. Daniel fell silent for a moment, staring into his cup, and then began to speak in a low voice heavy with emotion. "I never really told you about my childhood," he began. Sarah said nothing, just waited for him to continue at his own pace. My mother, Helen, raised me alone. My father left when I was about 5. I don't remember much about him, just a few vague images. My mother worked as a cleaner in several houses in the neighborhood, just like you do now. She did everything to give me a better life. He paused, taking a sip of tea, and Sarah saw that his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. When I was about 12, we went through a very difficult period. My mother got sick, nothing serious, but she couldn't work for a few weeks. The money ran out quickly. We ate 1 meal a day, sometimes not even that. I remember the feeling of going to sleep, hungry, of waking up hungry, of going to school with my stomach growling and not being able to concentrate on anything the teacher said. Sarah's heart ached. She knew that feeling all too well, had lived through similar moments, especially in the last few months before meeting Daniel. One day, Daniel continued, his voice firmer now, I came home from school and found a package on our doorstep. It was a bag of groceries, rice, beans, pasta, oil, sugar, coffee, even some cookies. There was no note, nothing explaining who had left it. My mother was surprised, but she accepted the help because she had no choice. We thought it was some neighbor who felt sorry for us. He looked at Sarah with an intensity she hadn't seen before. That happened 2 more times in the following weeks. Someone, we didn't know who, would leave food on our doorstep. Always in the middle of the night, always without identification. Those bags of food saved us, Sarah. Literally. They kept us alive until my mother recovered and went back to work. I never forgot that. I never forgot the kindness of whoever it was that helped us in that moment. Sarah was touched by the story, but she didn't yet fully understand why Daniel was sharing it now, after all these months. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to say something important. Years later, when I was an adult and my mother was older, she told me who had left that food. It was a woman who lived in the same building as us, a woman named Constance. Sarah's world stopped. The name echoed in her head like a bell, impossible to ignore. Constance, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel nodded slowly, watching her reaction. Constance. She worked as a cook in a restaurant and also did some cleaning jobs on the side, like my mum. They knew each other by sight, would greet each other in the hallway or the building's laundry room, but they weren't close. Sarah felt as if the floor were disappearing from under her feet. My mother, she said with difficulty. My mother's name was Constance, Constance Miller. She worked as a cook her whole life and did extra cleaning jobs to supplement her income. Daniel stared at her with wide eyes as if seeing her for the first time. Your mother was Constance? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah nodded, unable to speak, tears already streaming freely down her face. Daniel placed his teacup on the coffee table with trembling hands. My God, he murmured. My God, Sarah. I didn't know. I had no idea. When I saw you in the park that night, when I saw you and Beatrice lost, desperate, with nowhere to go, something inside me told me I had to help. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, like it was a debt I needed to repay, even without fully understanding why. He got up from the sofa and went to the bookshelf, picking up one of the picture frames. He came back and showed it to Sarah. It was an old, faded photo of a woman in her early 40s, with a wide smile, her hair in a bun, her eyes kind. This is my mother, Helen. She kept this photo her whole life as a reminder of the hard times we overcame together. Sarah looked at the photo and felt a deep recognition, not of the woman, but of the love and strength that radiated from the image. Your mother, Daniel continued, his voice breaking. Your mother saved me and my mum when we needed it most. She didn't know us well, she had no obligation, she probably barely had enough money for herself, but she still set aside part of what she had to help 2 people in need. And she did it anonymously without expecting recognition or gratitude. She did it because it was the right thing to do, because she had a huge heart. Sarah's tears were falling non-stop now. She vaguely remembered her mother mentioning that she helped some neighbors when she could, but she had never given it much thought. Constance was like that, always thinking of others, always extending a hand even when she herself was struggling. When I saw you and Beatrice in that park, Daniel said, sitting back down on the sofa closer to Sarah. It was as if the universe was giving me a chance to pay it back, to pay forward the kindness I had received. I didn't know you were Constance's daughter. I swear I didn't. But now I understand why I felt that immediate connection, that urgent need to help you. Sarah couldn't fully process what she was hearing. It was impossible, too much of a coincidence, but at the same time it made perfect sense. Her mother had planted a seed of kindness decades ago, and now, when her daughter needed it most, that kindness had returned multiplied. It was as if Constance were watching over her from somewhere beyond, ensuring that she and Beatrice would be safe. "She passed away last year," Sarah managed to say between sobs. "My mom. She had heart problems. It was very fast. I didn't have time to prepare to say goodbye properly, and after she was gone it felt like I had lost my footing. She was everything to me, my only real family. When I lost my job and things started to fall apart, I missed her so much, her advice, her strength." Daniel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Your mother was a special person, Sarah. What she did for me and my mom in that difficult time changed our lives, not just because the food physically nourished us, but because it showed us that there was kindness in the world, that there were people willing to help without wanting anything in return. That marked me deeply. My mother always spoke of Constance with such affection, such respect. When she passed away 5 years ago, one of the last things she told me was to never forget the lesson of kindness that Constance taught us." The two of them sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the weight and beauty of this revelation. It was a connection that went far beyond chance, an invisible web woven through time and circumstance, linking two families through acts of compassion and generosity. Sarah felt as if she finally understood why everything had happened this way, why Daniel had appeared exactly when she needed him most, why he had been so insistently kind to them. "You know what's most incredible?" Daniel said softly. "You're just like her. The way you care for Beatrice, the way you work hard to give your daughter a better life, the way you're strong even when everything seems lost. It's exactly how your mother was. Constance planted a seed of kindness when she helped my family, and now I'm seeing the fruits of it in your life and Beatrice's." Sarah wiped her tears with her hands. "I don't know if I'm as good as she was. Sometimes I feel lost, like I'm not doing enough." Daniel shook his head emphatically. "You're doing more than enough. You're surviving, you're fighting, you're raising a wonderful daughter on your own. That's more than most people can do. And now you have help. You have a foundation to stand on. You can breathe a little and plan for the future without so much fear." They talked for hours that night, sharing memories of their mothers, telling stories from their childhoods, laughing and crying together. It was a necessary catharsis, a deep emotional connection that completely transformed the nature of their relationship. They were no longer just a grateful woman and a generous man. They were two people whose lives had been intertwined by fate long before they met, two people who shared a common history of struggle, loss, and resilience. In the following days, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the revelation. She told Beatrice a simplified version appropriate for her age, explaining that Uncle Daniel and Grandma Constance had been neighbors a long time ago, that Grandma had helped his family, and that now he was paying it back by helping them. Beatrice, with the simple wisdom of children, just smiled and said, "Grandma was always nice. I bet she's happy in heaven knowing that Uncle Daniel is taking care of us." The simplicity and truth in that sentence made Sarah cry again, but they were tears of relief and peace, not pain. For the first time since her mother had passed, Sarah felt that everything was okay, that they were going to be okay, that there was a bigger plan at work that she couldn't see, but that was taking care of them all along. Daniel also changed after that revelation. He became even more present in their lives, not out of obligation or debt, but out of genuine choice. He had found in Sarah and Beatrice something he didn't know he was looking for: a family. He had been lonely for so long, living alone in the house he inherited from his mother, working at the shop day after day, coming home to an empty house every night. But now the house was full of life, of laughter, of conversation, of a human warmth he hadn't realized he missed so much. He began to make long-term plans that included them. He talked to Michael, Sarah's boss, about the possibility of her eventually taking on a supervisory role, earning more and having more stability. He researched better schools for Beatrice, places where she could develop her artistic talents that were so evident. He started renovating a corner of the house to turn it into a small studio where Beatrice could draw and paint more freely. Sarah watched all this with a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something more that she wasn't yet ready to name. Daniel had entered their lives as a stranger in a cold park, and now he was an essential part of who they were, how they lived, how they imagined the future. She could no longer imagine life without him, and that both comforted and scared her a little. One Saturday afternoon, while Beatrice was playing in the small backyard, Sarah and Daniel were in the kitchen preparing lunch together. They worked in sync now, each instinctively knowing what the other was going to do, moving around the kitchen like dancers who know each other's steps perfectly. It was in these simple, domestic moments that Sarah felt the depth of the connection they had developed. "Daniel," she said while chopping tomatoes for the salad, "I was thinking. I've managed to save a good amount of money these past few months. It's not a lot yet, but in about 6 months, I might be able to make a down payment on a small apartment for me and Beatrice." She said it casually, but she was actually testing his reaction, wanting to see how he felt about the possibility of them leaving. Daniel stopped what he was doing, holding the wooden spoon in mid-air, looking at her with an expression Sarah couldn't immediately decipher. "You want to leave?" he asked simply. Sarah bit her lip. "It's not that I want to. It's that I can't depend on your generosity forever. You've already done so much for us, more than anyone would. I need to be able to stand on my own 2 feet again." He put the wooden spoon on the counter and turned to face her fully. "And what if I said I don't want you to leave, that I like having you here, that this house has finally become a real home after years of being empty?" The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Sarah felt her heart race. "Daniel, you can't think like that. We can't be your responsibility for the rest of your life." He took a step toward her, his hands gently holding her arms. "And what if it wasn't about responsibility? What if it was about wanting, about choosing to have you in my life not out of duty, but because it makes me happy?" Sarah looked into his eyes and saw everything he wasn't saying out loud. The affection, the admiration, perhaps something even deeper. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm ready for that, to think in terms of something permanent. I'm still recovering from everything that's happened, still trying to find myself." Daniel nodded understandingly, releasing her arms but holding her gaze. "I understand. I'm not asking for anything now. I'm not demanding anything. I just want you to know that you have a place here, not just for a few months until you save money, but for as long as you want to stay. Because I choose you, Sarah. I choose you and Beatrice every single day." His words hung in the kitchen air, heavy with meaning and possibility. The months continued to pass and life followed its natural course, but something fundamental had changed after the revelation about the connection between their families. Sarah felt as if she had finally understood the why of it all, as if the pieces of a complex puzzle had finally clicked into place, forming a complete and beautiful picture. It wasn't coincidence, it wasn't luck. It was something bigger, something her mother had planted decades ago that was now flowering in a way she could never have imagined. Sarah's job continued to go well. Michael had kept his word and promoted her to supervisor of one of the cleaning crews, which came with a significant pay raise. She now coordinated a team of 5 people, organized schedules, distributed tasks, and did it all with the same dedication and competence she showed in everything she did. Michael often said she was the best hire he had made in years, and that if all his employees were like her, the company would grow exponentially. Beatrice was developing wonderfully. Her grades in school were excellent, she had a solid group of friends, and her passion for drawing only grew. The little corner Daniel had set up for her in the house had turned into a small creative sanctuary, where the girl spent hours creating colorful worlds on paper. She drew princesses, castles, enchanted forests, but also scenes from everyday life. Her mother cooking, Uncle Daniel fixing something, the 3 of them on the sofa watching television. They were portraits of a happy life, of a family that had formed unconventionally but was real in every way that mattered. The relationship between Sarah and Daniel also continued to evolve. After that conversation in the kitchen, where he had subtly but clearly declared that he chose her every day, they didn't bring up the subject directly again. But there was a new awareness between them, a gentle tension that wasn't uncomfortable but was always present, like music playing softly in the background. They held each other's gaze a little longer. Casual touches lasted a second more. Smiles had layers of meaning that went beyond friendship. Sarah was still afraid to fully surrender to the feeling growing inside her. She had been hurt before, when Beatrice's father left without looking back, and that wound had left deep scars. She was afraid to open up again, to trust, to believe that someone could love her and choose her without ulterior motives. But Daniel was patient. He didn't push, didn't demand, just continued to be who he had always been. Present, reliable, kind, always there when she needed him. One Thursday evening, Sarah came home from work earlier than usual. A pipe had burst in one of the buildings where her crew was scheduled to work, and everyone was sent home until the problem was fixed. She arrived home around 9 o'clock and found Daniel and Beatrice in the living room, sitting together on the sofa, surrounded by paper, paints and brushes. They were so focused on what they were doing that they didn't even notice her come in. Sarah stopped at the living room doorway and just watched for a moment. Daniel was holding a paintbrush carefully, following the detailed instructions Beatrice was giving with the seriousness of an experienced teacher. The girl was explaining color mixing, shading techniques, how to hold the brush at different angles to create different effects. Daniel listened with genuine attention, asking questions, trying to apply what she taught, laughing when he made a mistake. It was such a natural scene, so full of love and connection, that Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes. Beatrice had found in Daniel the father figure she had always lacked, and Daniel had found in Beatrice a source of joy and purpose he didn't know he needed. They were perfect together, and Sarah finally allowed the thought she had been avoiding for months to fully form in her mind. They were a family. Not on paper, not officially, but in every sense that truly mattered. It was Beatrice who saw her first. "Mum, you're home early. Come see what we're doing." Daniel looked up and smiled when he saw her. That smile that Sarah now recognized as being especially, for her, different from all his other smiles. "We had a problem at work and got sent home," she explained, walking into the room and approaching the sofa. "What are you two up to?" Beatrice held up the paper Daniel was painting with pride. "I'm teaching Uncle Daniel how to paint. He said he never really learned when he was little, so I decided to teach him. Look how well he's doing." The paper showed a sincere attempt at painting a tree, with a slightly crooked brown trunk and green leaves in various shades. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was done with care and dedication, and that's what mattered. Sarah smiled, taking the paper to examine it more closely. "It's very nice. You're a great teacher, Bea." Beatrice beamed at the praise, and Daniel shrugged with false modesty. "Well, I have a very patient teacher, even when I mix the wrong colors and make everything brown." They all laughed, and Sarah sat on the sofa beside them, watching as they continued their impromptu painting lesson. Later, after Beatrice had gone to bed, Sarah and Daniel stayed in the living room talking as they usually did. But this time there was something different in the air, an expectation, as if they both knew something important was about to happen. It was Daniel who broke the silence. "Sarah, there's something I want to show you. Something I've been thinking about for a while but wasn't sure if it was the right time." He stood up and went to the small office in the hallway, returning a few minutes later with a folder of documents. He sat next to her on the sofa and opened the folder, showing her papers that Sarah couldn't immediately identify. "You know that empty lot 3 blocks? From here, the one with the blue wall?" Sarah nodded, not understanding where this was going. "That lot belonged to my mother. She bought it many years ago, when prices were still low, with the idea of one day building a better house for us. But she never had enough money to build, and when she passed, the lot came to me." He took some papers from the folder, drawings that looked like architectural blueprints. "I've been saving for years, putting money aside from the shop, doing extra jobs on weekends. A few months ago, I hired an architect friend of mine to draw up a plan. I wanted to build a house on that lot, not too big, but comfortable. A real house, not this one that's getting old and needs so many repairs. Sarah looked at the drawings, seeing the floor plan of a single-story house with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a large living room and a backyard with space for a garden. It was a beautiful house, simple but very well planned. "It's a beautiful project, Daniel," she said sincerely. "You deserve to have a new house, a place that's really yours." He looked at her with those dark eyes that Sarah now knew so well. "I wanted it to be ours." Sarah's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Daniel took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I want to build this house for us. For you, for me, for Beatrice. I want it to be a real home for our family." He paused, seeing the shocked expression on her face. "I know it might be too soon. I know you might not be ready for this. But I have to be honest about how I feel. I love you, Sarah. It's not gratitude, it's not a sense of duty because of what your mother did for my family. It's genuine love, the kind that grows slowly, that's built on daily life, on the small shared moments." Sarah felt as if she couldn't breathe. His words echoed in her head, so long awaited, yet so surprising. "I love the way you take care of Beatrice," he continued, "how you're strong even when you're scared, how you work hard without ever complaining, how you smile even when things are tough. I love how you hum quietly while making coffee in the morning, how you arrange the flowers in the vase every week, how you get mad at me when I forget to take my shoes off at the door. I love everything about you." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "And I love Beatrice as if she were my own daughter. I love teaching her things, listening to her endless stories about school, seeing her drawings, being present for the important moments in her life. I want to keep doing that, not as a family friend or a borrowed uncle, but as someone who is truly committed, who will always be there through everything." Tears were now streaming freely down Sarah's face. She had spent so much time being afraid, so much time building walls around her heart to protect herself, that she had forgotten what it felt like to let herself feel completely. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm scared too, so scared. I've been hurt before. I've trusted someone who left and abandoned me with a small child. I'm afraid to believe in all this and then find out it was a lie." Daniel squeezed her hand tighter. "I understand. And I won't lie and say I can guarantee nothing will ever go wrong, because life doesn't come with guarantees. But I can promise that I will do everything in my power to be here, to take care of you, to be the man that you and Beatrice deserve. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. You are my choice, every single day." Sarah looked at the house plans again, seeing not just lines and rooms, but a future she had stopped believing was possible. "I need time," she said honestly. "I need to process all of this, to be sure of what I'm feeling." Daniel nodded understandingly. "I know, and there's no rush. The house will take months to be ready anyway. I just wanted you to know my intentions, to know that when I think about the future, you and Beatrice are at the center of it." The following days were filled with reflection for Sarah. She examined her feelings honestly, trying to separate gratitude from love, fear from the instinct for self-preservation. She had a long talk with Beatrice, in a way appropriate for the girl's age, asking how she would feel if Uncle Daniel became a permanent part of their family. Beatrice's eyes lit up with a joy so pure it left no room for doubt. "He's already our family, Mom," the girl said with the simple wisdom of children. "We just have to make it official." Sarah also spent a lot of time thinking about her mother. She sat in front of the picture frame she kept on her bedside table, looking at Constance's smiling face, and talked to her as she had since she was a child, when she needed guidance. "What do you think, Mom? Is this what you wanted when you helped his family all those years ago? Did you know that one day I would need the same kindness you offered?" There was obviously no verbal reply, but Sarah felt a peace settle in her heart, as if her mother were saying yes, that it was okay, that Daniel was a blessing, not a threat. It took 3 weeks for Sarah to make her final decision. One evening, after Beatrice had gone to bed, she found Daniel in the garage, tinkering with something on the car. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, and he immediately dropped what he was doing and wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "Of course, let's go inside." "Let's." They sat on the sofa, in the same spot where so many important conversations had taken place. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've thought a lot about what you said, about the house, about us, about the future." She paused, seeing the poorly concealed anxiety on his face. "And I realized that I love you too. I don't know exactly when it happened, if it was gradual or if there was a specific moment, but it's true. I love you not just for what you did for us, but for who you are, for your kindness, for your patience, your constant presence." Daniel's face lit up, but she raised a hand before he could speak. "But I need more time before we think about building a house together, about making everything formal. Not because I doubt you or my feelings, but because I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own 2 feet, that I'm with you out of choice, not necessity." Daniel nodded, understanding perfectly. "What are you proposing, then?" Sarah had thought long and hard about this. "That we continue as we are, but officially dating. That I keep saving money, and in about 6 months I'll be able to rent a small apartment for me and Beatrice. Not because I want to get away from you, but because I need my own space, to know that I can support myself if I have to. And during that time, we'll build our relationship in a healthy way, without dependence, only choice." She laced her fingers with his. "And when I'm in my own apartment, living independently, working and supporting my daughter on my own, then you can ask me again to build that house together. And this time I'll say yes without a shadow of a doubt, because it will be a decision based solely on love, not need." Daniel looked at her with admiration and respect. "You're incredible, you know that? Strong, smart, self-aware. I accept your proposal. We'll do it your way, in your time. Because what matters isn't speed, it's making sure we're building something solid." And so they did. In the following months, Sarah and Daniel made their relationship official, to the immense joy of Beatrice, who couldn't stop drawing pictures of the 3 of them together. They went on dates when they could, to the movies, for walks in the park, for dinner at modest but cozy restaurants. They built a relationship based on honest communication, mutual respect, and genuine love. 6 months later, Sarah had finally saved enough money to rent a small apartment on a street parallel to Daniel's. It was modest, just 2 bedrooms, but it was hers. She had done it on her own, with her own work, her own dedication. The move was bittersweet, because they had all gotten used to living together, but everyone understood it was a necessary step. Daniel helped carry the furniture, assembled Beatrice's bed, hung the curtains in the living room. And when everything was in place, he kissed Sarah on the forehead and said, "I'm proud of you." Life went on. Sarah continued to work and grow at the company. Beatrice continued to study and develop her artistic talent, and Daniel continued to work at the shop and visit them frequently. On weekends, they usually spent time together, alternating between Sarah's apartment and Daniel's house. It was a happy, balanced, healthy routine. A year after Sarah had moved into her own apartment, Daniel showed up one Saturday afternoon with the folder of documents under his arm. Beatrice was at a friend's house, so it was just the 2 of them. He opened the folder and showed her the updated blueprints for the house, now even more detailed, with material specifications, a construction schedule, a complete budget. "Construction can start next month," he said. "It will take about 8 months to finish. And I wanted to ask again, do you want to build this home with me? Do you want to marry me and officially become the family we already are in our hearts?" Sarah looked at the papers, then at the man before her, the man who had saved her and her daughter in a moment of absolute desperation, the man who had become her safe harbor, her best friend, her love. She thought of her mother, of Constance, who, without knowing it, had planted the seed of this story decades ago when she decided to help a family in need. She thought about how kindness multiplies, how acts of love echo through time in ways we can never imagine. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and her eyes shining. "Yes, I want to build this home with you. I want to marry you. I want to form a real family with signed papers and everything." Daniel pulled her into a deep kiss, full of the promise of a shared future. When they parted, they were both smiling through tears. The construction of the house began as planned. Sarah, Daniel, and Beatrice visited the site every week, watching the progress. Seeing the walls go up, the roof take shape, the rooms materialize, was like watching their dreams become reality, brick by brick. Beatrice had already chosen her room, the one with the window facing east, because she loved waking up to the morning sun. While the house was being built, they planned the wedding. It would be something simple, just in the presence of close friends and colleagues, a small but meaningful ceremony. Sarah had no family, but Daniel had some distant cousins who promised to attend. Michael, Sarah's boss, offered to be a sort of groomsman, saying how immensely proud he was to see how she had rebuilt her life. The house was finished on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 8 months after construction began. It was even more beautiful than in the drawings, with walls painted in light colors, the garden just beginning to be planted, the spacious kitchen filled with natural light, and the 3 bedrooms each with its own particular charm. There was room to grow, to create memories, to live a full and happy life. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, an intimate ceremony at the courthouse followed by lunch at a small but cozy restaurant. Sarah wore a simple but elegant cream-colored dress. Beatrice looked beautiful in a pink dress she had chosen herself, and Daniel was impeccable in a suit he had bought especially for the occasion. When they exchanged rings, and the judge pronounced them husband and wife, there wasn't a person in the room who wasn't moved. Beatrice gave the most touching speech of the day. She stood on a chair, holding a piece of paper where she had written her words in a child's still uneven handwriting, and read aloud, "I want to thank Uncle Daniel, who is now going to be my real dad, for finding me and my mum in the park that day. He didn't have to help, but he did because he has a good heart. And I want to thank Grandma Constance, who, even though she's not here anymore, took care of us in a special way by helping Daniel's family a long time ago. I think that's what angels do. They take care of people even when we can't see them. Now we have a real family with a new house and lots of love. And I know Grandma is happy in heaven seeing all of this." There wasn't a dry eye in the room when she finished. Sarah pulled her into a tight hug, with Daniel wrapping his strong arms around them both. And there, in that perfect moment, the family was complete. They moved into the new house the following week. Each of them arranged their room with care, choosing where to place every piece of furniture, every personal object. Beatrice's room became a small creative paradise with her paints, brushes, and sketchbooks organized on a shelf Daniel had made especially for her. The master bedroom was simple but cozy, with a comfortable bed and a window overlooking the small backyard garden. On the first night in the new house, after Beatrice had gone to sleep in her newly arranged room, Sarah and Daniel sat on the back porch, side by side, looking up at the Chicago stars. That insisted on shining despite the city's light pollution. "We did it," Sarah said softly. "We built a real home." Daniel put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "The 3 of us built it, and your mother somehow helped build it too. This all started with her kindness years ago." Sarah thought about that, about the perfect circle that had been completed. Her mother had helped a family in need without expecting anything in return. That family grew, and when Constance's daughter needed help years later, the son of that family was there to extend a hand. It was a story of how kindness multiplies through time, of how acts of love are never wasted, even when they seem small or insignificant at the moment. The months turned into years. The house filled with life, with laughter, with happy memories. Beatrice grew up, becoming a talented teenager who won a scholarship to an art school. Sarah was promoted again at her company and eventually started her own cleaning service business, employing other women in difficult situations and offering them the same opportunity Michael had offered her. Daniel continued to work at the shop, but he also began teaching basic mechanics to young people in the neighborhood, teaching a trade that could change lives just as it had changed his. They never forgot where they came from, the hardships they faced, the desperate moment in that cold park when all seemed lost. They kept that memory alive not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of resilience, of hope, of how things can change when we least expect them. Every year, on Constance's birthday, the whole family would visit the cemetery and bring flowers to her grave. Beatrice always drew something special to leave there, an artistic tribute to the grandmother she never really knew, but whose kindness had indirectly saved her family. Sarah would stand there for long minutes, talking mentally to her mother, telling her about their life, thanking her, feeling that loving presence that had never truly left. The story of Sarah, Daniel, and Beatrice became known in the neighborhood. It was told in conversations, used as an example that one should never lose hope, that kindness exists and multiplies, that sometimes angels appear disguised as ordinary people who simply decide to do the right thing. Some said it was too much of a coincidence to be true, that stories like that only happen in soap operas. But those who knew the family personally knew it was all real. Every word, every moment, every tear, and every smile. And so life continued, with its natural ups and downs, its joys and challenges, but always with the certainty that together they could face anything. The house that Daniel built became much more than walls and a roof. It was a sanctuary of love, a physical testament to how one person's kindness can echo through time and completely change the course of lives she never even got to meet. Sarah often thought about how drastically her life had changed on that cold night in the park. If Daniel hadn't shown up, if he hadn't returned Beatrice's sketchbook, if he hadn't offered help, where would they be now? The answer was too frightening to contemplate for long. But he had appeared not by chance, but because decades earlier, a woman named Constance had decided that helping people in need was more important than hoarding every penny for herself. That was the true lesson of the story, that our acts of kindness, however small they may seem, create ripples that spread in ways we can never imagine. That helping someone today might save someone you will never meet tomorrow. That we are all connected in invisible ways, weaving a web of compassion and support that sustains humanity even in the darkest of times. And as Sarah lay in bed next to her husband in the house that had been built with love and hope, as she listened to Beatrice's quiet breathing in the next room, as she felt the peace and security that had become part of her daily life, she whispered one last prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for the mother who raised her with so much love. Gratitude for Daniel, who chose to help when he didn't have to. Gratitude for Beatrice, who gave her purpose and joy every day. Gratitude for the second chance life had given her when all seemed lost. And there, in that house full of light and love on the west side of Chicago, the circle was finally complete. The kindness planted by Constance had blossomed into a happy family, a safe home, a promising future. And that family, aware of the gift they had received, was determined to continue the cycle, to extend a hand to others in need, to plant their own seeds of kindness that would one day blossom in places and times they would never witness. Because in the end, that is what makes us truly human. The ability to care for one another, to offer help without expecting anything in return, to believe that together we are stronger than we are apart. And that was the greatest inheritance Constance had left. Not money or material possessions, but the profound understanding that kindness begets kindness, love begets love, and that even in the darkest moments there is always hope as long as there are people willing to extend a hand to help a stranger in need.